I'm Sally Coulthard. I'm an author and smallholder and have spent 2 decades building the good life with my family and animals in the Yorkshire countryside.
The veg garden is in full swing and has been for a few months, and I really want to make the most of all this lovely produce. The trees and soft fruit bushes around the farm are also heavy with fruit, so I want to show you how to harvest and preserve a few of my favourites. If you want to eat seasonally, it's really important to be flexible and to be able to turn gluts into magic. This sometimes means adapting recipes as you go along, but that's all part of the fun. So the veg garden is like an orchestra, and each vegetable plays its note at some time in the season, and it's really important to make the most of what's available at the time. And that's why I'm a big believer in pickling, preserving, drying and freezing all that lovely produce. Now, I have to confess that I am slightly addicted to pickles. I can remember as a child sneaking into my mum's larder and scoffing jarfuls of gherkins and pickled onions that she'd slavishly made over summer. And my addiction continues, and I absolutely love pickled chillies. Pickling seems to take a little bit of the heat out of the chillies, but also it gives them a lovely tangy flavour. So today, I'm going to show you how to make a simple jar of pickled chillies, and I use these in everything. In sandwiches, in wraps, you can throw them into hot dinners or even just snack straight from the jar. Now, I've already filled my jar nearly to the top with chopped chillies. This jar has already been sterilised, but I'm just going to add one more because it's really important that the jar is absolutely crammed to the top. Just roughly slice it, doesn't have to look particularly neat. I'll add those to the top and press them down really firmly. You want to see if you can pack in as many pickles as you possibly can. Now, the next stage is to make a really simple pickling liquor. And once you know how to do this, you can pretty much pickle anything. I pickle gherkins and beetroot and onions and lots of things, and the same pickling liquid works every time. In my pan here, I've got 100 millilitres of just water. And to that, I'm going to add 100 millilitres of white vinegar. Now, you can just use white malt vinegar, which is really cheap and brilliant for pickling, or you can use cider vinegar or white wine vinegar. So I'm just going to pour that in, and that ratio is basically therefore 1:1 water to vinegar. Now to add the sweetness. So to the pickling liquid, I add 4 tablespoons of caster sugar, and this just takes away some of the harshness of the pickles and gives that lovely sweet tanginess. Then to add the salt. Now this obviously adds flavour, but it also helps preserving process, so I'm just going to add 1 teaspoon. And then for some subtle flavours, I'm going to add 2 bay leaves. Just pop those in the bottom of the pan. I'm going to add a teaspoon of coriander seeds, which add a lovely warmth to the pickling liquid. And finally, which you'll find in most pickles, and that's a teaspoon of yellow mustard seed. Right, those all pop in the pan, and then I'm going to heat that through, bring it to the boil to the point where the sugar has dissolved, and then it's as easy as that. It takes only a minute or 2 for the pickling liquor to boil. So I'm just going to check it. Yep, that looks about done. The sugar's dissolved, the salt's dissolved too, and it's been brought to the boil. Now all I have to do is pour it onto the chillies. Be careful because it's really hot. Everything goes in, the herbs, the spices, so you fill it right to the top. You want to cover all the chilies. You don't really want to leave any chilies poking out the surface. Right, that's done. All that's left is to bob the lid on. This should keep for a month in a nice, cool, dark larder, or 4 months if you store it in the fridge. Once it's opened, keep it in the fridge and eat it within about 2 weeks, but that shouldn't be a problem because they are so delicious. Chutneys are a great way to turn a glut into a sticky, spicy treat. We eat chutneys with everything, with cheeses, cold meats, but also curries and other hot meals. This recipe uses pears and ginger, but you can chutney pretty much any fruit or veg. We chutney beetroot, onions, apples, figs, as long as it can cook down to a soft, gooey pulp. There are 3 basic elements to chutney. One is the fruit and veg, and that gives the flavour and the body of the chutney. The second is sugar and vinegar, and these are basically things that will preserve the chutney and give it a long shelf life. But also you can add fragrant notes with spices. Today I'm going to use star anise, but you can use nutmeg, cloves, peppercorns. There are lots of fabulously warming spices that you can use in a delicious chutney. One of the great things about chutney is that you just throw it all into the pan and cook it down. It's really simple. So for this recipe, in my pan, I've already chopped 1 cooking apple and 1 whole onion. Both of those have been chopped into nice small pieces so they cook down really easily. Now to the apple and the onion, I'm going to add about 500 grams of peeled and diced pear. These are the windfalls that I picked earlier on, and it's a brilliant way of using up fruit that's maybe a bit past its best or not quite ripe. Okay, so the pear, I'm going to add 150 grams of brown sugar. I use brown sugar because it gives the chutney a lovely kind of sticky, treacly quality. To that, 300 millilitres of white wine vinegar mixed together with balsamic vinegar. You can just use white wine vinegar if you like, but I like to add a touch of balsamic also just to give it that lovely treacly brown colour. To the vinegar and the sugar, I'm then going to add sultanas, but you can pretty much use any dried fruit. They also add to the sticky quality of chutney, which is one of the lovely bits about chutney. So they go in, but you could use dates or raisins or chopped apricots, anything like that. Now I really love ginger, so I'm going to use about a thumb's length of ginger, but you can use however much you like. If you find it a bit strong, just use less, or you could use dry ginger, which is much kind of warmer and gentler. And I'm just going to grate that straight into the pot. I don't bother peeling it because it'll cook down and you won't get any of the toughness of the skin. That's the ginger in. And now my last spice I'm going to add is star anise. I absolutely love star anise. It's not only beautiful to look at, but it smells beautifully aniseedy. I'm going to probably put about 4 into this. I tend to like my chutneys quite fragrant. They pop in as well. Now when the chutney's cooked down, you can either take those star anise out or you can leave them in. I tend to leave them in. It doesn't really bother me if you get the odd piece of broken star anise in the mix. Now all I have to do is simmer it for about 40 minutes until it's a lovely, sticky, gooey consistency and all the liquid has evaporated. This has been cooking for about 40 minutes and it's deliciously soft and sticky. I was checking on it about every 5 minutes and made sure that I left the lid off to let the moisture evaporate. But now it's ready to decant into a sterilised jar. The recipe makes about 750 grams. These jars are about 500, so it makes 1 and a bit of this kind of jar or 3 of these little weenie ones, and I really like the weenie ones because they make brilliant presents. Anyway, I'll use my jam funnel, which is absolutely invaluable for not making a mess, and start spooning it in. Right, it's lid on, and that's it. The brilliant thing about chutneys is actually that they improve with age, and while you could enjoy this in as little as 2 weeks with a summer picnic, the longer it keeps, the better it tastes. And so you could be enjoying summer veg right through till Christmas. Picking blackberries really reminds me of my brother when we used to go on family trips, picking pounds and pounds of fruit to turn into crumbles. This time I'm going to pick some for a delicious raspberry and blackberry jam. But first, I just want to show you a quick technique of how to properly pick blackberries from the bush. So rather than just picking one berry off at a time, which makes the other ripe berries fall off, I like to use 2 hands and gently ease the blackberries off into both hands and then put them into the container on the floor. That way you don't lose any berries. Now we have had a glut of 2 of my very favourite soft fruits this season. The first is blackberries, which have been growing in the hedgerows around the farm, and the other is raspberries, which have been really successful in our soft fruit cages. And I'm going to show you how to create a really simple but delicious jam from those ingredients. So to make jam, you need fruit, obviously, but you also need sugar and pectin. Sugar is a thing that gives jam its sweetness, but it's also what acts as a preservative. And pectin is the ingredient that gives jam its set. Now, most fruit contains a bit of pectin. Some fruit contains lots, like blackcurrants and apples, and you don't need to add extra pectin to your jam. Some fruit, like raspberries and strawberries, hardly contains any at all, and so to make a raspberry jam, you need to give it some extra pectin. And you can do that either by adding pectin as a sachet, or you can buy jam sugar, which already has pectin added to it. So for this recipe, in here, I've got a kilo of fruit. There's half blackberries and half raspberries. Raspberries which don't have much pectin in will be helped out by the blackberries which do. But I'm also going to add to that a kilo of preserving sugar or jam sugar. Now jam sugar already has the pectin added, which is fantastic and makes life a lot easier. So the sugar is the thing that stops your jam going off. Now most commercial jams use a ratio of about 60% sugar to 40% jam. This stops jam going off and gives it a long shelf life, but I prefer that real fruity kick that you get from less sugar and more fruit. So I'm going to do 50% sugar and 50% fruit. And then the final ingredient is just a squeeze of lemon. Now the lemon helps the fruit release its natural pectin. So a quick squeeze of this really helps the process. Right, now to put it all in the pan. The really simple bit about this recipe is the fact that it uses a kilo of sugar, and jam sugar always comes in kilo bags. So that makes measuring really simple. And in terms of quantity, this recipe will make about 3 normal sized jam jars or 2 lovely Kilner jars. This is my faithful jam pan, which has really tall sides. When sugar's hot, it can bubble quite furiously. So the tall sides just add a bit more safety to the process. Right, now to add the sugar. That's the kilo of sugar going in. Perfect. Quick squeeze of lemon. Just watch out for catching the pips. Quick stir. And now it's time to get it on the hob. Cook everything on a medium heat until all the sugar has dissolved. This should take about 5 minutes. Then turn up the heat and bring to a rolling boil. This is when the jam starts to bubble like molten lava. Keep it on a rolling boil for 5 minutes and then take off the heat to do the wrinkle test. Right, this has had 5 minutes now at rolling boil, and I'm going to test to see whether it's ready by doing something called the wrinkle test. And for that, you need a plate that's been in the freezer, and I'm just going to take a spoonful of this lovely jam and put it onto the plate and let it cool. That should take about 2 minutes. Now to test whether it's ready, you simply push the spoon onto the jam, and if it wrinkles, which it's doing, which is brilliant, it means it's ready to put into the jars. So even though the jam's off the heat now, it's still really hot. So I'm going to ladle this into the jars. I just find it's easier to control. Take your time with this. This is going into sterilised jars. That's really important, and I'm using my trusty jam funnel, which I find really helps, especially when you're handling such hot liquids. There we go. Now, when you're filling a jar, you don't want to fill it right to the top. I don't really want it touching the lid. Next one. Smells amazing. It literally smells of summer in a jar. Now, with all preserving, and this is jams included, you sterilise your jars because you basically want to inhibit any bacteria forming. So by sterilising the jars, you give your jam a fighting chance at not getting any mould. I'm just going to literally add a little bit more, and then I think that is it. Right, lids on. And this will take about a day to cool, and it'll be ready to eat straight away. So tomorrow morning you could be enjoying some blackberry and raspberry jam on fresh crusty toast. And now for the best bit, the tasting. Now, lots of people strain their jams, but personally I prefer to leave the pips in. I think it looks better, but actually also pips provide lots of important nutrients and really important fibre. So lashings of jam. Here we go. Oh my God, that is the taste of summer.